Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to welcome everyone back to this week's Daytime Dialogues, but it's even a greater pleasure to welcome a very dear friend, colleague, and mentor, Rabbi Dr. Jacob J. Schacter. For those who haven't heard Rabbi Schacter, I don't know where you've been, because he's been everywhere, and he's been at KINS many times, and he is truly a mentor to hundreds of Rabbanim around the world, and a teacher to all of us. So it's truly a great pleasure for us to be able to welcome Rabbi Schacter. Thank you, Rabbi, for joining us this afternoon.
It's really a great honor for me to be here, Rabbi Matanki. Your communal expertise is exceeded only by your extraordinary human decency, and it's been a privilege to know you over these years. I see in the background your shul. It's very familiar to me. I have had a wonderful opportunity more than once to be with you, and I continue to have the utmost respect for you and for all the work that you do, and it's a great honor to be with you today.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that very much, especially coming from you. What I'd like to do today is just start with the obvious question. Tisha B'Av is tonight, and as I've mentioned earlier to you, Rabbi, when I think about Tisha B'Av, there are two great teachers in modern times who have taught us about Tisha B'Av, Rav Soloveitchik, and for the last 30 years, you, because you have really brought the concept of the lecture of creating this experience around KINS to world Jewry. The Rav did it in Boston, but you've done it in every way imaginable, broadcast from Teaneck. And I'm just wondering, how has that experience of teaching so many years changed Tisha B'Av for you? And how do you think it's changed our community and understanding of Tisha B'Av?
I'll answer from my perspective right now, because this year, namely tomorrow, is the first time in over 30 years, close to 40 years, that I'm not going to be doing what I've been doing all this time. And so I'm in a very sad and difficult place personally, not only because of everything that we're facing, and not only because it's Tisha B'Av, but the transition from having done this for decades to shrinking into only 1 hour is extremely painful. I had the privilege of sitting at the feet of Rabbi Soloveitchik in the 1970s in the Maimonides school. On Tisha B'Av, the Rav would come in. We'd daven Shachas at 8 o'clock in the morning, and he'd come in and we'd daven. And then on the way in, he'd pick up one of the flimsy, soft cover KINS, I think from the Hebrew Publishing Company.
We remember this.
Yeah, so it was on a bench somewhere. He just picked it up, and he went. He gave a shiur for us for about 45 minutes, from about 8:45 to 9:30, 9:45 to 10, and then we went straight without a break until 5 o'clock. And what he did was he opened up the world of KINS. The world of KINS, as all of you who are watching and listening know, is very complicated. The Hebrew is difficult. The concepts are difficult. The sources that the KINS are based upon are not always easily accessible and available and known. And it was a Sefer HaChosim. It was a closed book. And I remember for years when I was a little boy sitting there and my mind wandering not only because I was a little boy, but because I had no idea what I was saying. People around me had no idea what they were saying. And Rabbi Soloveitchik really gets the credit for creating a world of intelligible KINS. And I scribbled notes. It was one year I remember I just had a baby, and in my notes I wrote, I left for an hour and a half to take Leah Tehillah to the doctor, and then I came running back in. And later on, a couple of years later, the Soloveitchik family, through the Torah Torah Foundation, asked me to write this up, which I did, and I got all kinds of tapes. So I am really just following the footsteps of the master. When I came to the Jewish Center, my shul that I served from 1981 to 2000 on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. A year or two in, I decided that I was going to recreate this. And it started with 12 people on the 4th floor in a small base medrash. And then it moved to more people and longer. And since I came to YU in 2005, for the last 15 years, I've recreated it. We go from about 9 to 5 with about a 6-minute break. It's been very powerful. And just one more thing before you want to jump in. I think about how amazing it is, the power of technology. I'm sitting in a shul in Teaneck, and there are maybe 800, 900 people in the shul, but it's being live recorded and transmitted. And there are, I don't know what the algorithm is, maybe 25, 30,000 people who are listening, live listening. And I think about how the Rav in Maimonides school sat on the floor. There were maybe 60 people sitting around him. And that was it. And could you imagine today, if the Rav was sitting there in the Maimonides school, they'd have 250,000 people listening to him. So I feel that it was somehow my opportunity to be able to transmit that, to be the conduit, to bring that out to the world. And it's transformed my Tisha B'Av. And hopefully it's made a difference.
So your father was very close with the Rav. I recently saw a video of your father with the Rav and the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Is that how your relationship developed with the Rav? Because you went to Tarvadas, you didn't go to YU.
Right. So my father, Zechrona Livracha, his relationship with Rabbi Soloveitchik was extremely close. This is a very interesting and for our family very important footnote in history, that my father, Zechrona Livracha, was in Yeshivas Rabbeinu Yitzchak Elchanan studying with Rabbi Moshe Soloveitchik, learning for smicha. And in 1940, at the end of 1940, Dr. Revel died. He was the president. And then in Gimel Shvat, 1941, in January, Rabbi Moshe died. He was relatively a young man. And there were a whole bunch of boys who were stuck because they were expecting to be able to get the B'chinis. And now it was over. There was the whole yeshiva was falling apart. And I must say that there were a number of boys who decided that YU is done, and Orthodoxy, in fact, is done. They took the subway down to 125th Street, and they enrolled in the Jewish Theological Seminary, and they got rabbinic ordination from there, many of them. But my father hung in there, and one thing led to another. And when the Rav finally came, and it was not simple, there was a huge fight about whether the Rav should succeed his father. And when he did come, my father was the first online. And my father, therefore, is the first one to have gotten smicha from the Rav at Yeshivas Rabbeinu Yitzchak Elchanan. Rabbi Soloveitchik gave smicha to more rabbis than anyone in the totality of Jewish history. There's some 2,500 klafim that he signed on. My father was number one and had since then a very close relationship with him. And that carried over to me. I was not a Talmud of the Rav. I never went to Yeshivas Rabbeinu Yitzchak Elchanan or to YU. But because of my father, the Rav was my Masada Kedushin. And then when I came to Harvard in 1973, I came to study with Professor Twersky, was the older son-in-law of Rabbi Soloveitchik. Then I personally developed a warm relationship with the Rav. I went every Motzei Shabbos to his Chumash lecture, Sunday morning to the Gemara Shir, and that's when my own personal relationship with him developed.
So in the years when you were with the Rav was, did he still have the fierce character of personality? Was he teaching in Yiddish, teaching in English?
By then he was already teaching in English. Already at YU, he was already teaching in English. There was a Talmud Ezra Lightman. It's a magnificently beautiful story. He used to teach in Yiddish, and there was a boy from Lowell, Massachusetts, who came and he said, I don't understand. And the Rav had a soft spot for him because he came from nearby Boston. And the Rav says, all right. The next day, boom, in a nanosecond, he switched. He started in English, and he moved into English also in Boston. In Boston, the Rav was an entirely different person than he was in YU. I can't really speak to YU. I only know stories, incredible stories about what kind of a fierce Rebbe he was. In Boston, he was relaxed, he was sweet. He had a chenifdika smile all the time. You could ask him anything and he wouldn't bite your head off. And so I benefited from the calmer Rabbi Soloveitchik. And I think that's why he actually made the trip back to Boston. I mean, it was a big schlep, for 40 years. He's back and forth. And in the early years, remember, there was no Eastern Airlines. In the early years, took him 7 hours on the train each way. But he did it because Boston was his safe haven, a place where he felt comfortable. In New York, everybody was chapping and zipping and pulling, and still it was peaceful. And he really was that way. And it was such a privilege to be able to access that part of him the way he was there.
And Professor Twersky at Harvard, we've also heard stories of his demanding academic and scholarly requirements, expectations. You are a musmach, lahavdil, of a PhD from him.
I do have a PhD. Let it suffice it to be said right now, it was not easy.
Mm-hmm. And while you were doing that, you were already at the shul in Sharon?
Yes, I came to study with Professor Twersky and Professor Yosef Chaim Yerushalmi at Harvard in 1973. In 1977, I took my first shtela, which was the Young Israel of Sharon, Massachusetts. I needed money, so I got paid $6,000 a year to be the rabbi of the Young Israel of Sharon, Massachusetts. We had 12 families. My wife and I and our little child, we were the 13th family. We were there for 4 years. By the time I left, I made $18,000. And the shul went from 13 to about 80. And we built a mikveh, we built a new shul, we started a day school. I mean, Baruch Hashem, and then I went to the Jewish Center.
The Jewish Center. I still remember meeting you in the Jewish Center. I don't expect you to remember this. You were working on one of your shiurim in the good old days where you were cutting out Mar Makomos. You were sitting in the hallway, in the auditorium on the first floor at the table, preparing it. And I'm watching, and while you're cutting and pasting, we were having a conversation. I had come there for a meeting in the Jewish Center.
So I'll say two things. First of all, I apologize profusely that I wasn't giving you my full attention, that I was apparently distracted. And second of all, I am antediluvian. I was born way too early. And I must tell you, and as Schacter ani maskir, I still cut and paste. I don't use any of the Sefaria, the Bar Ilan. I beshita, I do that because I feel that any of those platforms, the Rebbe Kiveger looks exactly the same way as the Chumash does. The font is the same. And I feel that for the sake of pedagogic clarity, it's important for the Tzuras Hadaf to be identified. And people who see it will remember it, but otherwise it just morphs into one big line. And I'm beshita opposed to that.
Really? Okay, I never thought that there was the Shita versus the question of the technology, but
it's a Shita. It may, maybe it's a teretz because I'm so old, but I have actually learned how to do that, and I refuse on principle to do that. I feel the Tzuras Hadaf of a Gemara, the Tzuras Hadaf of a Reb Chaim, the Tzuras Hadaf of a Ktsos, the Tzuras Hadaf of whatever it is of the Nesiva Shalom needs to be intact for the reader to be able to integrate it and incorporate it in a much, much more effective way.
So let me switch for a moment to another one of your hats, the mentor of younger Rabbonim. And the younger Rabbonim span is, I think I missed the cutoff by about 6 months because my Chevrusa, who is actually 10 months younger than I am, made it into your first cohort or your second cohort, and I didn't.
That's terrible. That's terrible. If I could, I would roll back and do it again. I'm so sorry.
I'm still very young, so it's okay.
I understand. The reason why I didn't ask you is because I felt that there was nothing I could teach you. It's only because of my high regard for you.
Thank you. But you've been doing it for many, many years. How have you seen it? Have you seen a shift within the younger Rabbonim on where their focus is or where their heart is or where their thoughts are?
Yeah, that's a good question. I started this in 2002 when I was at the Rabbi Joseph P. Soloveitchik Institute in Boston. I spent 5 years there after I left the Jewish Center before I came to YU. I brought it with me to YU, so I'm now in my 18th, 17th year. I'm now in the middle of my 8th cohort, and that's about 260 rabbis who have gone through this program. I have found not much of a difference in that the Ahavas Yisrael, the desire to help Jews, the acknowledgement and recognition that professionalism is at the heart of what a successful pulpit rabbi needs to be and needs to have. It's at the heart of that profession. And also a sense of self-awareness. Rabbis need to understand what bothers them and why do certain things bother them. My wife is a psychoanalyst, and she comes every Yarchei Kala to help the rabbis understand themselves. So somebody presents a scenario and describes how they were totally upset. Somebody else is sitting there and said, happened to me and I was not so upset. So many things that occur outside resonate differently with individuals based on their whole interior history, their mahus, their childhood, their experiences, v'chule. And I found that rabbis, and maybe in this nakuda, it has moved the needle a little bit. More and more rabbis are more and more aware of the importance of going to therapy, the importance of understanding themselves, the importance of understanding how to balance their own personal needs and communal requirements, how to not slaughter, and I'm using a very strong word, slaughter their children on the altar of the Jewish community, because rabbis often are insecure and they're worried that if they don't show up to the meeting, then they're going to be in trouble. But meanwhile, the kid has a chumash play. I'm a maniac for family. And rabbis more and more understand how important that is. From day one, I was a maniac, but people was more resonant. So Avas Yisrael, caring about the Jewish people, I am in awe of these rabbis and in awe of these young rabbis. They're incredible. Rabbi Bressler is an example, an exceptional young man. And there are others in the Chabura that I am now currently involved in. These are great young men. We are in good hands. Essentially, the basic ingredients of good rabbinate is something that has been with them all this time. The only thing that may have moved a little bit is an even greater awareness of the importance of understanding oneself.
So now, the next time you get together, please God, soon in person, the world will have changed because of COVID. And I talk with colleagues and we speak about the fact that we're not sure how shuls are going to emerge out of this. There are people who can come back to shuls who have opted out. There are people who are still afraid to come to shuls. We understand. Shuls now, because of the use of social media and the internet, there's a lot of the walls have broken down within shuls. So if I'm a member of a KINS, but I like a shir that's given in Los Angeles, I now can be part of that shir. When you get together with the rabbis, how will you approach that? Is that something that you've been thinking about?
I've been thinking about it a great deal. And I'm not really sure. I'm actually extremely concerned for the reasons that you mentioned. I think people are more and more getting used to living without a shul, frankly, without a rabbi. They haven't heard drushes in 4 months. Rabbis scramble Erev Shabbos to send out something and invite people to print out and to read, but it's Eino Domesh Mila Re'iyah. And I don't know how many people actually do it. But just to see to see a Rav, to see a Manhig, to see a Morada Asra, to see how he davens, to listen to how he speaks, to have a connection, that's gone for the last 4 months, and it's not so quick to come back. A lot of the older Rabbanim, my age around, are not coming back to shul so fast, even if it begins to open up a little bit. It's very complicated. I'm worried about day schools. I'm deeply concerned about what the Jewish community is going to look like at the other end. My goal would be not to walk into my next, the Archei Kala Mirza Shem Sheyibana B'Mehera B'Yameinu will be able to do that with here's what I think, here's a mahalach, but let's talk about it. Let's open it up. Let me share with you my concerns. And what I find inevitably, because I do this all the time, whatever the issue of the day is, that's one of the things we talk about at the Archei Kala, besides Chomer Ledrush and besides personal growth, is Chaver Islay. What I give them in the Archei Kala is not just me. What I give them in the Archei Kala is one another. And that's a huge, huge plus. And the best practices, and they could learn from one another. And I'm looking forward to be able to open this up and to be able to myself learn and to have each of us learn from one another as to how people conceptualize what this is going to look like going down the future. One thing I'm sure is that it's going to be different.
It will be. One of the things that I see is how the definition of community has shifted. The definition of obviously the interpersonal, you don't see people anymore.
There's a virtual community. It's now a virtual community. You're 100% right. People can access shiurim ein l'davar sof, and on the one hand, it's great. You know, there's an Erev Shabbos, a Kumsitz, Shabbos Ruach.
Yeah.
So I don't have to go to my own shul Shabbos Ruach. I have 98 other shuls to go and click the same button and go to somebody else.
It's going to be very different. If I can I go back? I'm going to go back to Tisha B'Av for a moment, because obviously we're just a few hours away from it. The Rav I know is very opposed to any kind of changes in liturgy, whether it's during the day on Shabbos and Yom Tov, and even the addition of kinos, if I understand correctly. We do have some kinos though from post Shoah. Is that something that he would have allowed? He would have gone with? Is it something that you encourage? Some of those kinos?
Those are two separate questions. The Rav was absolutely, totally, and unalterably opposed to the kinos that you mentioned. He said explicitly that after the time of the Balei HaTosfos and after the time maybe as late as the 17th century, we do not have the capacity, we meaning the Jewish people, does not have the capacity to be able to produce kinos that are of ultimate depth and meaning, that's over. And he said, of course we have to remember the Shoah. He spoke a lot about the Shoah on Tisha B'Av. He held that Yom HaShoah is absolutely inappropriate. You mentioned before, he was opposed not only to additions in the tefillah, but in additions to the calendar. He was very, very opposed. He said, Tisha B'Av is a day to remember the Shoah. And he spoke about it at length. And he said every year, when we say the kinos for the Crusades, we talk about Shpira Vermaisa Magenza, we should keep in our minds, we should think about Berlin and Chaslavich and Vilna. And it's the same thing. And it's the same issue. And it's the same challenge. Just substitute the name. And that's where we think about the Shoah. And that's where we remember the Shoah, not by creating new kinos and new liturgy and new ritual. I myself find it hard to resonate with that. In all the years, 30 plus years that I've been teaching on Tisha B'Av and learning, at 5 to 5, when I'm ready to wrap up, in my packet, I put in the kino was written by the Baba Vereva Zatzal. That's a beautiful kino. It's the end of the Art Scroll kinos book. And I recite that. Sometimes I recite the kino from Reverend Rosenfeld in his edition of the kinos for the Shoah. I feel that it is more important to more directly confront the experience and the historicity of the Shoah that way.
So you do use it.
I do.
Yeah. And in the kinos itself, is there one that, and this is the wrong word, one that resonates perhaps more with you than some of the others, or each time it resonates differently?
I'll tell you, it's a good question. Every year is different. And every year is different, not because the kinos are different, obviously. Every year is different because I'm different. And there are things that I find to be meaningful one year that somehow don't resonate with me another year. I have to prepare material for 6 hours, for 5 hours. The rest of the time, I'm reading the KINS, so that I don't have to prepare. But every year it's different. I've never repeated. And I stop and I comment and I stop. But I must have in my house, and I'm not exaggerating, probably 25 feet of papers, 25 feet of papers, of folders on Tisha B'Av that I've accumulated over the last 45 years. And every year I start rifling through, and some years, something that for 10 years I just passed by hits me. And it's that way not only for the Divrei Torah, but it's also that way for the KINS.
So I was asked before we were started, I asked Rabbi Bressler, is there a question you want me to ask? And he said, yes. How do you learn to speak like Rabbi Schacter? So I told him a lot of practice, but
I'll tell you something. My late father, you mentioned him before, was a massive orator. When I was growing up, I was tongue-tied. I could not speak. I could not speak publicly. I was extremely nervous. When my first Stella in Sharon, I had 16 people in Shul Shabbos morning. I would cough repeatedly Shabbos morning before I went to Shul. At the Jewish Center, it was really difficult for me, to the point that I went and got a speech teacher. And a speech teacher came once a week, and she helped me understand myself. It was all internal. You're here for a reason. You're here because you're the rabbi. You're here because they want you to be here. Own it. Take charge. And she helped me. And over the years, I've worked at it. It has not come easy to me. And that's why any rabbi should work on it. Don't give up. You can do it.
No, it's an important lesson, because when you look at, and especially younger rabbanim, but myself included, when I look at the comfort you have on the stage, whether it's at APAC in front of 20,000 people or at KINS in front of several hundred people, you own the bima when you deliver. And
Rabbi Mitanki, I must say, Baruch Hashem, that you are an outstanding speaker and orator. You project not only knowledge, but kindness and warmth. Halavaisha yirbu kamocha b'Yisrael.
Well, I thank you very much. And my mother, who is probably watching, thanks you as well.
Okay, Mrs. Mitanki, you should have a lot of nachas. You have a wonderful son. A lot of nachas.
Thank you, Rabbi Schacter. And I want to take this opportunity to thank you for this last half hour. It has been a joy and a pleasure.
Thank you. I hope it was what you wanted.
It was exactly what I wanted. And Rabbi Schacter, I'm looking forward to next year, please God, when you'll be able to go back to what you had done for so long. Get back in shul soon. Please stay safe. Please
thank you. You too.
My best to your wife, and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Hatzlacha Rabba, and we should be zeicher lenachamas Tzion v'Yerushalayim.
Amen. Thank you very much.
Bye bye. Thank you.